In this video, I'm going to show you how to set up a node for pull configurations in DSC. In order to set up a node for pull configurations, we need to set up the node's LCM or Local Configuration Manager. The LCM is what tells the node how to consume and configure DSC configurations. I've provided a link to a Microsoft web page called Configuring the Local Configuration Manager. To get started, we need to create a configuration similar to a regular DSC configuration, except we are going to use the DSC Local Configuration Manager attribute just before the configuration. Here, I'm calling my configuration LCM pull config, and for node, I'm going to use server 1. Now, before I get to our settings, let me jump over to my other tab to show you how the settings are currently configured for server 1. I've created a sim session to server 1 and I'm going to run get DSC local configuration manager against that session. As you can see here, the configuration mode is set to apply and monitor, configuration mode frequency minutes is set to 15, reboot node if needed is set to false, and refresh mode is set to push. By default, the LCM is configured in push mode. Now let's go back to the configuration. For refresh mode, I'm going to use the tab key to go through the available options. Disabled means that DSC configurations are disabled and will not run on this node. We can also choose from pull or push. For this demo, I'm going to use pull. Check out my other video on how to configure a node in push mode. For the configuration mode property, we have a few options as well. Apply and autocorrect, which means DSC will apply the configuration, then run consistency checks at the intervals specified by configuration mode frequency minutes. And if a resource is found to be out of the desired state, DSC will try to correct it by running the configuration against the node again. Apply and monitor, which means that DSC will apply the configuration and run its consistency checks. But this time, if it finds a resource that is out of the desired state, it will not try to correct it. And finally, apply only. With this setting, DSC will apply the configuration, then do nothing more unless a new configuration is pushed to the node or pulled from a service. I'm going to use apply and autocorrect for this node. For configuration mode frequency minutes, the default value is 15 minutes. I'm going to bump that up to 30, so that DSC will check the configuration every 30 minutes. And finally, for reboot node if needed, the default value is false, but I'm going to set that to true. That means that if any of the resources being configured required a reboot, DSC will reboot the node. The next section of this configuration is the configuration repository web. This is where we will specify the pull server where this node will download its configurations. Here I have the server URL for my pull server, which I have already configured. PowerShell 5 introduced the ability to use configuration names instead of configuration IDs. Configuration names make configurations easier to remember because they no longer need to be named as long GUIDs. To use configuration names, however, you will need to know your pull server's registration key and specify it here in the LCM configuration. Once that is specified, I'm going to tell the LCM to pull the web config configuration. Optionally, you can also configure a report server with the LCM. When you do this, the LCM will report the results of its consistency checks back to a report server that you choose. This can be a pull server or Azure automation. In this case, I'm using my pull server as a report server as well. Now let's go ahead and run this configuration and set the output path to a folder called LCM config. This will create a MetaMoth file in the LCM config folder, which we can use to configure the node. In my video on writing a simple DSC configuration, I used start DSC configuration to push the configuration to the node. In this case, we are going to use set DSC local configuration manager and point it to the path of our MetaMoth that we just created. Now, if I run get DSC local configuration manager against server 1, we can see that it is set to apply and autocorrect every 30 minutes and reboot if needed is set to true. We can also see that the refresh mode is set to pull. You will also notice that the configuration download managers and report managers are both populated. And we can expand those to see their details. That is how to set up a node for pull configurations in DSC.